Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires, coming to you from Baltimore. I'm speaking with Sergei M. Plekhanov. He is an associate professor of political science at York University and a former deputy director of the Institute for U.S. and Canadian Studies in Russia. And in segment one, we try to address the current memorandum of agreement that's been signed between Russia and the U.S. Over the airspace and potentially trying to address avoiding getting in each other's way. But in this segment, we're going to take up the issue of what a regional solution to Syria might look like. Sergei, so what does a regional solution to the conflict look like?
Regional solutions are notoriously hard to achieve because usually in the region there are competing forces, competing interests. And we all know what that competition is all about in the Middle East. There are several axes of conflict in that part of the world. And apart from everything else, the capacity of the United States to maintain a balance of power as the dominant force in the region has drastically declined as a result of major strategic blunders made by the United States. But the United States is less capable of manipulating the main players in the Middle East. And that's a new situation because since the Camp David Accords of 1973, when Egypt and Israel normalized their relations, which was a drastic change in the Middle Eastern geopolitics, the United States was the main power there. And Russia was marginalized. The Soviet Union at the time was marginalized, having lost its positions in Egypt. And then the Soviet Union, in 1991, the Soviet Union was dissolved, and Russia completely withdrew from any kind of active participation in the Middle East. So the United States, as the one hegemonic power, was trying to manipulate the situation there. And we remember what plans the United States had at the time. Greater Middle East, transforming the entire belt of Muslim states from the Mediterranean all the way to Afghanistan, to transform those states into entities which would be the formally more democratic, pro-Western, and stable, and so on, safe for Israel, and so on and so forth. And of course, it was obvious that it was a pipe dream, that no such plan could be implemented. But they started boldly and confidently in Iraq, and they got stuck. Afghanistan was somewhat different because there was a United Nations authorization for some kind of an action against the Taliban regime. It was a horrible regime. And besides, there were signs that the Taliban were directly responsible for enabling the attacks of 9/11. But then this plan led to tremendous destabilization of the Middle East on the one hand. On the other hand, it enabled Iran to increase its regional influence enormously. In fact, think of where Iran was before 2001, before 9/11. It had one enemy on the western frontier, that was Iraq, a bitter enemy. And on the eastern frontier, it had Afghanistan, the Taliban regime, which was strongly anti-Iranian. And so, thanks to the United States, both those enemies were slain. What replaced the enemies was greater instability and chaos, but Iran was capable of now spreading its wings and establish itself as the most influential regional power. And the Americans then were saying, okay, what do we do now? Oh, let's invade Iran. That was the idea. And the mid-2000s, around 2005, 2006, the Americans were trying to find ways of clipping Iran's wings. Whereas Iran was suggesting to the Americans, hey, we seem to have, common interests, so let's normalize relations. And even the question of relations with Israel was on the table. But the response from the United States was, we don't negotiate with evil, we destroy evil. Okay, go ahead and try. And of course, nothing came out of it. So under the Obama administration, they shifted to negotiations with Iran, trying to resolve the issues and take advantage of the fact that Iran is a rising regional power. Now, and to the credit of the Obama administration, they managed to accomplish some kind of a resolution of the nuclear issue involved, and the negotiations that gave us the deal with Iran were really valuable, and they contributed to normalization of relations in the region.
So, Sergei, this current situation we have is actually even better in terms of coming up with a regional solution. At least the nuclear factor in relation to Iran has been removed. It's being negotiated, which makes it more of a possibility that you can bring Iran to the table along with the other partners in addressing a regional solution. What in your
offer a comment on that, because it's not up to the United States now to tell all the players to kind of fall in line with the new policy, because the United States then, the moment the negotiations produced a deal, there was an upsurge of criticism and concern from the major Sunni powers in the region, such as Turkey and Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and so on. They said, what the hell is going on? You are now helping Iran extend its influence and increase its influence in the region. And there are bitter enemies. So the Shia-Sunni cleavage in the Middle East immediately came to the fore. So then the United States began to reassure its Sunni allies, and those Sunni allies are actually actively trying to overthrow the Assad regime. In a way, the reason why the United States cannot stop trying to overthrow Assad is because they want to remain on the good side with the Saudi Arabians, Saudi Arab, with the Saudis and others, the Turks and so on. Because they cannot control all the players. The players have their own games and their own interests. So now the challenge is to try and create a political format within which the diverse players, and in the first place, Iran, Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth, would be able to consult on stabilizing the region, because all of these states, all of the key players are threatened by the new force that has been produced by the chaos, and that is ISIL. So is it possible or not? It is extremely difficult. That's the only solution that one can think of, because if we yield to the logic of the Shia-Sunni conflict, if we say, okay, we agree with Saudi Arabia that it's extremely important to prevent Iran from further increasing its influence. Okay, then we will be helping this Sunni bloc in its conflict with Iran, which could, by the way, lead to a war between Iran and the Sunni countries, which it could start over conflict in Iraq, where Sunni and Shia are in direct conflict, or in Syria. Now, would that be in anybody's interest? Would then the United States be able to say, okay, that's not a bad thing, but they've just been trying to normalize relations with Iran? How can you do it at the same time? You are trying to normalize relations with Iran, and at the same time, you are trying to help overthrow a regime in Syria, which is supported by Iran. You're trying to cooperate with Russia on fighting ISIS, and at the same time, you're trying to confront Russia over Syria. I don't know. There are too many balls in the air that they are throwing. I don't think that they can very well play with them.
Yeah.
So they keep dropping the balls here and there. And the result of these balls is more and more chaos. I would like to draw your attention to a remarkable article in yesterday's Wall Street Journal by Henry Kissinger, who is suggesting that the United States should get serious about the failure of its policy in the Middle East, about the deepening destabilization in the region, which is extremely dangerous, and accept the fact that Russia's interests are such that the United States can and should cooperate with it in defeating ISIS, and then agreeing on a number of conditions in the Middle East which could help stabilize the region. He thinks that it's possible. His big concern is Iran, by the way, more than Russia. He's not particularly concerned about Russia. He thinks that Russia is acting out of its own national interests, which are legitimate. Russia is not trying to dominate the Middle East, and so Russia is open to all kinds of regional arrangements. Iran is a different story, but then, even on Iran, he thinks that with proper diplomatic activity and a proper combination of various methods, the United States can bring Iran to agreeing on such a resolution, which would be a acceptable to other players. I mean, it's easier said than done, but what is required above all is clarity of vision. I think the United States has to decide what its goals in the region are, because you have conflicting statements coming from different people and priorities which are at odds with each other. And that's not a sign of a policy which is going to be successful.
All right, Sergei Plekhanov, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you back.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.